Hello, everyone. Happy New Year. This is like Tibetan tradition, how they are offering things on New Year.
Happy Losar, Geshe-la.
Losar Tashile.
Losar and Samritash Delayu.
Berchaya.
Puchamechuya Chutao. Chutao.
Chatam.
Chada.
So welcome everyone to this, to our Losar event and to the night of remembrance of Lama Yeshe with Nick Ribush. And we are also live on Facebook. So just so you know, that is also happening. If you want to tag people or anyway, you can go back and watch it there.
People can hear you.
Yeah, everyone can hear me, right?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, great. It doesn't matter. I'm coming through yours. Okay, so let's event into the.
Oh no, we have to unmute here. You mute yours.
Mute yours.
No, you can use the one.
Yeah, mute yours, darling, because we have to have the video come through mine.
Yeah.
No, you have to mute everything. Mute everything. Hi, sorry. The Nick and Wendy team, it's a little, run by the seat of our pants. Okay, so we will start with Lama. I want to check, I need to share screen. Jeez, come on. View. Okay, share screen. Okay, darling, we're going to do this. Ready? We'll go to the next video. Sorry, everyone can see my... Okay.
Oh.
Huh? Okay.
2 years ago,
Yeah.
I freed my life for studying the Dharma exclusively.
Good.
And I went to the Kala Chakra meditation
Great.
and did a Tara retreat.
Oh, no,
Great.
wait.
And went to the Dharma celebration.
Great.
Practiced other sorts of things.
Great.
Yeah.
And I feel that
I'm gonna start
in 2
again.
years I haven't achieved anything.
Good. That means you have good realization.
Darling, we didn't get to practice.
Yes,
All right, well, we're gonna do it again.
that's good.
Oh, wait, I can't even...
That's not only you. Yes.
Right. Good.
All right,
Yeah.
I can't. Hang on. We didn't.
Fine.
I don't have enough.
Oh.
Okay, so this is a technical glitch. I would like to play that again for you because you guys could hear the audio but not see the video, right?
Well, subtitles.
Okay, so I want to play that for you again. And I need to share my video. Let's see if I can do it. Share screen. No, that's not the screen I want to share. Okay, stop share. I don't know where it's gone, darling. No, hang on. Okay, all right, now we can, there we go. Okay, now we'll do it one more time.
2 years ago,
Yeah.
I
Okay, okay. Okay. All right, we're going to share the screen now, and I think I've got it.
Two years ago,
Yeah.
I freed my life for studying the Dharma exclusively,
Good.
and I went to the Chakra meditation
Great.
and did a guitar retreat,
Great.
and went to the Dharma celebration,
Great.
practice other sorts of things,
Great.
and I feel that in 2 years I haven't achieved anything.
Good. That means you have good realization. Yes. That's good, yeah. That's not only you. Right. Good. Yeah. Fine.
Okay. Then here, you change the sound over to you.
Okay, so
that was a little taste of Lama Yeshe.
Where's
Why
this
is it
echoing?
echoing?
Hang on, let me.
Boy, this is technical difficulty central here.
We're good now.
Can you hear me now? Okay. So first, may this evening session benefit all sentient beings, quickly bring them all to enlightenment by talking about, thinking about, hearing stories about our beloved Lama Yeshe, without whom we wouldn't be gathered here in this particular group tonight for sure. So I met Lama Yeshe first in 1972 when I was traveling in Southeast Asia and got interested a little in Buddhism, Buddhist meditation in Thailand, and a couple of months later, 2 or 3 months later, finished up in Nepal, and a friend told me about the meditation course that was starting the following week up at Kopan Monastery. And the book I'd read that had got me interested in Buddhism talked quite a bit about Buddhist meditation, which I didn't know anything about. So I thought, oh, a Buddhist meditation course. that sounds like something I wanted to find out about. And I was actually supposed to meet a guy in Kathmandu. He wasn't there. So since I had to wait, I thought I may as well, kill a few weeks doing this meditation course. So waiting for him to show up. So I went up to Kopan and found it was much cheaper to stay there than down in Kathmandu anyway. So that was kind of the clincher. And there are about 50, just over 50 Westerners there doing this course. This was the third course that had been given by Lama Yeshe and Lama Zopa Rinpoche, although most of the teachings, well, actually all the teachings at that course until the very end were given by Lama Zopa Rinpoche. And most of us who hadn't been there before at first didn't really know that there was another Lama there. So after about a week, we were sitting on the steps of Kopan Gompa in a break. There were a couple of flights of stairs, and we were sitting on these steps, one person above the other, picking lice out of the hair of the person below. And this nun, Anne McNeil, Canadian nun, who'd been with the Lamas for 2 or 3 years at that point. She was Lama Zopa Rinpoche's teaching assistant, and she was the course organizer. She approached me as I was having lice picked out of my hair and said, "I heard you're a doctor." And I kind of agreed warily. And she said, "Do you think you could come and see Lama?" So I wasn't quite sure who she meant, as she led me round to the back end of the Kopan Hill, where there was an old house. The Kopan Gompa itself, where the course was being held, had just been built earlier that year, actually. It wasn't quite finished. There was just a cement floor, which later had a wooden floor put over on top of it. But Rinpoche lived upstairs in the new Gompa, and Lama Yeshe still had a big room down in the old house. So she took me down at the old house and into this room, and there was this smiling Lama saying, "Thank you very much," even though I hadn't done anything. And yeah, if you could see me now. And he had bashed his leg, his shin, on a glass top coffee table, and the wound had got infected. Lama had had rheumatic fever as a child, and as it sometimes does in children, it had damaged his heart valves, some of his heart valves, and it's very dangerous for people with damaged heart valves for them to get, with rheumatic heart disease, to get bacteria in their blood, because the bacteria lodge in the uneven, scarred valves, and then they get infected, and then they start sending blood clots all over the body and bacteria, and it's a bad scene. So Lama needed penicillin injections. So we sent down to Kathmandu to get a bunch of procaine penicillin injections. You didn't need a prescription or anything in Kathmandu then, you just walked in and bought them. So someone got a bunch of penicillin injections, and I went down to Lama's room, and he lay down on his bed and he pulled up his shem tub and exposed his holy buttocks, and I gave it a good swab, and then I stuck the needle in, and as I squeezed, something happened. What happened was I'd forgotten to tighten the barrel of the syringe into the needle, and so when I squeezed, and it's quite viscous, tough to squeeze this procaine penicillin out. So as I squeezed, the syringe separated from the needle, which was left sort of swinging in the breeze in Lama's holy buttocks, and penicillin went all over the wall. So Lama kindly looked around and said, "Why don't we try again tomorrow, dear?" So I was really embarrassed, and so that's how I met Lama anyway. So I went back, and then he had a very successful course of penicillin over the next few days, and so drawing blood from a Buddha was my first encounter with Lama. That's one of the 5 extreme negative actions, if you don't remember. Samenga again. Anyway, the course went on, and Lama came right at the very end, and he gave refuge and precepts to people who wanted them, refuge and 5 precepts, and gave refuge names to people who took refuge. And oddly enough, he gave me the refuge name Thubten Zopa, which was the same name as Lama Zopa Rinpoche. So I was kind of embarrassed to have, I didn't really think I'm not worthy, but by that stage, the Lamas were calling me Dr. Nick anyway, so that's kind of who I remained. So the course finished, and by the end, I wasn't really convinced by the teachings, but I also knew that I couldn't leave. Most of the other people left, but I stayed on, and I remember, we, at the end of the course, there was a group photo, and there's a hill, the back of the Gompa, Kopan Gompa's here, and then there's this hill, and then on the other side of the hill is the old house. And we went up to the top of the hill to take this group photo. And I remember after the photo going up to Lama Zopa Rinpoche and saying, thank you, Rinpoche, for changing my life. So I guess I knew something then. And afterwards, I was speaking to the Canadian nun, Anila Ann, and I told her, I think I want to do Dharma, but I'm not sure quite what I meant by do Dharma. I think sort of be a full-time Buddhist. And I said, but I don't have kind of much money behind me, and how would I support myself if I just devoted myself to this? And she looked at me as if I was a bit simple and said, oh, if you give yourself to the Dharma will always look after you. So I was like, oh, okay. So I don't know. Here I am 50 years later, fat, rich, and prosperous, and the Dharma is doing a good job looking after me. Yeah, but not last that long.
Oh, not last that long.
So the other thing we had, I'll just say one thing before going on, because I'm sort of relating my experience with the Lamas and Lama Yeshe in particular, but the real story of Lama Yeshe is in this book that we just published last year, Big Love. Life and Teachings of Lama Yeshe, 2 volumes, full of pictures and stories, and how this organization developed it goes up to the mid-80s when Lama passed away. So that's the definitive story. Not what I'm saying is just blah, blah, blah. So the course teachings consisted of Lama Zopa Rinpoche giving a commentary on a textbook that had been put together by the students from the previous course, from the second course. It was called The Wish-Fulfilling Golden Sun of the Mahayana Practice, and it was the students' notes. And so it was a bit rough. And afterwards, I had an interview with Lama Zopa Rinpoche, and I told him this was a life-changing book, but, it was kind of basically a Lam Rim text, life-changing book, but I thought it needed a bit of kind of editorial work and cleaning up. And he said, oh yeah, that was just put together by the students from the previous course. I have some ideas about how I'd like it to be. If you want to come and help me work on it, you can, So of course I wanted to. And I finished up working with him for the next 6 weeks, revising this book and producing a new edition for the 4th course, which happened in March of that year, March of 73. At the same time, I wrote to a lot of friends in Australia and suggested that they come to Copan for this sort of life-changing experience. And quite a few of them came, including my mother. Actually, my mother came because she thought she would be rescuing me from some kind of cult. But in fact, I think with the Lama's help, I finished up rescuing her from samsara, to a certain extent anyway, from her samsaric life. And she became very devoted to the Lamas and to Buddhism for the next 73, for the next 35 years, till she passed away at 94. But there are about 20 or 25 people that I'd written to, or who read the letters that I'd written, came to meet the Lamas. And as a result, Tibetan Buddhism, when they went back, they invited the Lamas to come the next year, and Buddhism had a pretty good kickstart. Tibetan Buddhism had a pretty good kickstart in Australia.
Can people ask questions in the chat?
Yeah, if anybody wants to ask questions as I'm kind of raving on here, you can just do them in the chat, and my beautiful assistant will convey them to me, and she'll read them to me, much like okay, we won't go to the impeachment inquiry. She'll read them to me and I'll try and answer. So I worked, so a bunch of people came to the 4th course with this new edition of the Wish Fulfilling Golden Sun, and there are about 120 people came to that course. And after the course, so Lama Zopa Rinpoche, as many of you probably know, is a Sherpa Lama. He was born in northern Nepal in a small village called Tangme, and he was recognized as the incarnation of the Laudo Lama. Laudo being a small area, a couple of thousand, about at 14,000 feet, which is a couple of thousand feet higher than Tangme. And in his previous life as the Laudo Lama, who'd passed away in the mid-40s, and the local people had asked him to build a monastery so they could send their kids there, the boys there, to be monks and get an education. And he said he was too old to do it, but he'd come back and do it in his next life. So long story short, but when Rinpoche was 10 years old, a couple of his uncles took him to Tibet on pilgrimage. And when it came time to return to Nepal, they're at a place called Dobo in southern Tibet. And Rinpoche said he didn't want to go back. He wanted to stay in Tibet. So that caused a little consternation with his uncles, who were kind of imagining going back to Tangme, and Rinpoche's mother saying, "Where's the kid?" And they said, "Well, we left him in Tibet." He stayed there for 3 years, and then in 59, when so many Tibetans went into exile, he did too. And then he finished up in a refugee camp in Buxa in north east India, in West Bengal. And then that's where he met Lama Yeshe, and they met their first Western student. And with her, they came to Nepal in about 68. And then they found Copan Monastery and got that going in 69. So after the fourth course, there were about 20 young Sherpa monks at Kopan at the time. And in the summer, they would go back up to Laudo with the lamas, and then in the winter, when it was quite cold to stay there and difficult to get food, they'd come back to Kathmandu, to Kopan. So in the summer of '73, 6 of us Westerners went up, and I flew up to Laudo with the lamas, with Lama Yeshe and Lama Zopa Rinpoche, and some of the others went ahead. And when we got to, so in the plane, I don't know if you've ever seen pictures of Lukla Airport. That's where we used to fly to in those days. Now they just take a helicopter almost up to Laudo itself. But what we did back then was we flew to Lukla. And if you've ever seen pictures or videos of Lukla Airport as it was, it's this tiny little ribbon on the face of a mountain, and it's rated on YouTube as one of the world's 10 most dangerous airports, I think. So keep changing. And on the plane, Lama was like reciting mantras like crazy just the whole time, and I was wondering why he was doing that. Then when we came to descend to the airport, I understood why. We got away with it. And then from Lukla, then you walk up to Laudo, to Namche Bazaar, which is the small village or little town now, where people who going to Everest they go from there. From Namche they go northeast, and Laudo is kind of more or less due west from Namche. It's about a 3-hour walk. So so we got to Namche, and then we had a rest. Then I think we stayed there the night, and then the next day we walked to Laudo. And when you get to near Laudo, there's the track sort of dips down, and you're walking along, basically following a river called the Dudkosi, which is a little below you, a few hundred feet. And then there's this really steep climb up to Laudo, which is perched, like I said, a couple of thousand feet higher. And when we got to the bottom of the hill, there's a small stream and a mill house, and Lama said to me, "You go with Lama Zopa that way," and it was kind of this sort of a slower way. And so he said, I didn't know anything about the place at the time, so I said, okay. So I went with Rinpoche. And Laudo is, although Lama Yeshe is Lama Zopa Rinpoche's teacher, and Rinpoche was extremely deferential to him always, up in Laudo, Rinpoche was the big Lama. He was the Laudo Lama, the incarnation of the Lama. That's Lama Yeshe at Laudo in about 1972, I think. So I went up with Rinpoche, and the people knew he was coming, and so there was all this incense burning, and people lined up and offering him cutters as we got close to the monastery. The monastery had been built in 71 after Rinpoche and Lama Yeshe had first got back to Nepal, and they went up to Laudo the first time in 69, and that's when Rinpoche fulfilled the previous Laudo Lama's promise to build a monastery there. So finally we got into the monastery building, and Lama Yeshe was sitting on his bed very comfortably, and he'd been there for quite a while. And he'd gone up this really much steeper way. As I mentioned, Lama Yeshe had rheumatic heart disease, and he already had quite an enlarged heart, and manifested some difficulties in breathing and shortness of breath and stuff. So it just, a year, a couple of years later, I was traveling with the Lamas. We were in the States, and the Lamas went to see their teacher, Geshe Zopa, in Madison, Wisconsin. And Lama had some cardiac catheterization done, some heart studies at the University Hospital in Madison. And he'd already been told by doctors in Kathmandu, and actually on a previous visit to the States in '74, he'd been told that he really needed valve replacement, otherwise he wouldn't live much longer. And he used to tell us that sometimes his heart would stop during the day. I think he's said one time his heart would stop maybe 100 times a day, but he could always get it to start again by reciting mantras. So they did these studies, and then they allowed me to go to the conference where they were looking at the these video studies on a big screen. And then one of they couldn't really believe that someone with this really enlarged heart was able to travel and get around that much. And one of the doctors said, but he's a Buddhist monk, so I'm sure he leads a very sedentary lifestyle. And if you knew Lama, he was anything but sedentary. And so I told them this story that I just told you about Laudo, and how he climbed up this 45-degree angle mountain and got there well before Lama Zopa Rinpoche and myself. And I really don't think they believed it, but anyway.
Just one question. You talked about the wish-fulfilling golden sun a moment ago. So that's available, and I'll just put a link.
You told somebody asked you a question?
Yeah, is the wish-fulfilling golden sun available?
Yeah, the wish-fulfilling golden sun's on our website, lavayeshe.com.
And I'll put a link in the chat.
Okay, there's a link in the chat. There will be. I worked with Rinpoche on that book. We did a revised edition for the 4th course in the spring of '74, and then we did some more work before the 5th course in the spring of '73, and a bit more work before the 6th course in the spring of '74. And the last time we worked on it was in '75. In 1982, Lama Yeshe organized a big gathering of these Western monks and nuns, and probably 50 or 100 lay people as well. He called it the Enlightened Experience Celebration, which was held in Bodh Gaya, India, and in Dharamsala. And after that, Lama Yeshe went to Tibet. And before he went, I was in Tushita. Lama Zopa Rinpoche was going in retreat, and I got the job as being his attendant. And so apart from his cook, I was the only person he was allowed to speak to, according to Lama Yeshe. And before Lama left, he said very sternly in English to Lama Zopa Rinpoche, Zopa, I want you and Dr. Nick to finish your work on the Golden Sun. So, Rinpoche very humbly said yes, and I was like, yes, finally. And but it's a long story, which I won't tell you now, but we never did finish. So the version that's online is the one that we did the last work on in 1975 in Australia. Anyway, jumping back, in Laudo in the summer of '73, the Lamas were there for a couple of weeks and then they went back down to Kathmandu and left the rest of us, the 6 of us there to do different things. I was with my then girlfriend, Yeshe Kadro, Aunt Marie, and she was a nurse, and we set up a clinic at Kopan. All these people, my friends who came to the 4th course, I asked them to bring medicines and bandages and stuff. And I wrote to a lot of drug companies in Australia asking for free medicine and stuff. So they brought quite a bit of stuff. And we set up a nice clinic. So we took a bunch of medicines up to Laudo, and we ran a little clinic for the Sherpas up there in the summer. And one of the others, I don't know if people know Gareth Sparham, he taught English, and there was a guy called Dick Robinson and his girlfriend Meredith. They did maintenance work around the place. And there was a nun, a Spanish nun up there. She did a retreat. But a few weeks, 5 or 6 weeks after getting there, I turned yellow with hepatitis. And I had to stay in our house. We were staying there. Most of us were staying in a house about 15 minutes walk from the monastery. And so I'd brought my, that's her. I brought my notes from the 3rd and the 4th courses up with me, and another friend gave me his extensive notes, a guy called Brian Beresford, who was translated from Dharamsala. And I was editing all these notes. And while I was editing the notes, which were basically a commentary to the wish-fulfilling Golden Sun, it became somehow clear to me that, it became a serious consideration that I should become a monk. And so when we got back down to Kathmandu, I asked Lama Yeshe if I could get ordained, and he sort of fell back on his bed, screaming with laughter at the very idea of it. Now we know why. But at the time, it seemed like a good idea. And there are a bunch of other Westerners too. Some were who'd been at previous courses at Kopan, and some who'd come from Dharamsala. At the time, there were 2 groups of students, Western students, studying with Gelug Lamas. There was a bunch of us at Kopan, and there was another group at Dharamsala. And, people in Dharamsala included, that's the Lamas at Tushita Center in Dharamsala. People, Alan Wallace and Stephen Batchelor and Glenn Mullen, and they didn't come to Kopan, but they were some of the luminaries who went on to greater things, who were studying with Geshe Ngawang Dage at the Tibetan Library that His Holiness had established to give teachings on Tibetan Buddhism. So a bunch of students from the library came to Kopan for the course. And, Kopan was kind of a monastic scene, and the Dharamsala scene was much more lax. We thought we were pretty holy at Kopan, sort of being in the monastic environment. And we thought they were kind of degenerate, sort of dope smoking, wife swapping laymen. But some of them turned out to be pretty good, actually. Anyway, so there were about 10 of us wanted to get ordained. So Lama agreed, and he said, but what we need to do is establish a Sangha organization for the Western monks and nuns. So, and he called it the International Mahayana Institute. And, those, before we got ordained towards the end of '73, we had a meeting with Lama, and he gave us a pep talk and explained the rationale for starting this Western monastic organization. And then in January 74, His Holiness the Dalai Lama was giving a Kala Chakra initiation in Bodh Gaya. And I think it might have been the first one he'd given outside of Tibet. And about 100,000 people came from Tibet and from, all the whole Himalayan region. And there were a few Westerners there too, from Kopan and Dharamsala. We drove down from Kopan in a rented truck. So we received the initiation, and then 10 of us received ordination from His Holiness Ling Rinpoche. And so Ling Rinpoche was our abbot. We got novice ordination, and in the ordaining party there was Lati Rinpoche and Sekong Rinpoche and Lama Yeshe and Lama Zopa Rinpoche. You may not know those lamas, but that's like, Geshe-la knows, it's like Ling Rinpoche, Lati Rinpoche, Sekong Senchab Rinpoche. I mean, amazing, right?
Yeah, I just heard them. I never met anyone. Just
yeah. Well, I can give you the transmission, Geshe-la.
When I'm coming, and they're unfortunate person.
You have to meet their incarnations.
Yeah.
Boston, yeah. Yeah. So yeah, Ling Rinpoche was here. Lati Rinpoche, I think, is in Gandan, his incarnation, and Sekong Rinpoche's incarnation is somewhere in India. He disrobed. He's a layman, but okay. So Lama Yeshe had us ordained, and we started this Western Sangha organization.
There's a question. The question is, how did you feel when Lama Yeshe laughed at you because you wanted to get ordained and he laughed at you? How did you feel? That's the question.
How did I feel? I thought, oh, maybe I should think twice. But I asked again, I don't remember if, I think that he laughed and he said, okay, then, I mean, when he finished laughing, he said, well, let's think about it, So I wasn't totally dismissed, But then later, some of the others said he had the same reaction when they asked as well, and other people subsequently. So, I think it was his way of saying, just make sure you're serious about this request. Lama Yeshe never made anyone feel bad, So after that, we came back to Kopan, and we started trying to figure out how to live as a little Western monastic organization in this Tibetan monastery. And we were basically given the old house. Lama had moved up into upstairs into the new Gompa, and we had the old house, and we had our own kitchen down there. And Lama set up this daily schedule for us, where we got together in the morning before. There we are in 74. Some of us, Lama Yeshe set up this daily schedule where we did Jorcha, so preliminary practice puja in the morning, and then we had breakfast, and two of us took turns each day cooking for the others. And so there 14 or so of us, so basically once a week you had to be the cook for the others. And we served breakfast to the cooks served breakfast to the other Sangha at the end of the puja. And then we did our own study and meditation. And then before lunch, we came together and we did a Vajrasattva puja. And and then we had lunch, and then again in the afternoon we did work around the monastery, or we did studies, or I was involved in editing and publishing, and some of the others were doing transcribing and typing stuff up. And because we were producing, so yeah, the other thing I when I was working on editing these commentaries on the Wish Fulfilling Golden Sun in '73, the other thing I realized, apart from thinking I should become a monk, was that by just taking notes, we really missed a lot of what Rinpoche taught. But we didn't have electricity at Kopan at the time, and there weren't any tape recorders around, or any good batteries either. So I decided for the next course, the 5th course, that I would try and write down everything Rinpoche said rather than just take notes. So at the beginning of the course, I sat myself right down in front of his throne, and I really tried to write down everything. And I more or less did. This nun on the right, the bottom right-hand corner, that's Yeshe Kadro, my ex-girlfriend. And by the end of the course, I had filled up these 2 or 3 big Indian notebooks full of scrawl with abbreviations that I made up. And some of the stuff I could hardly read myself, but somehow she was able to read it all. So she typed it up, and then I edited that, and then we printed those commentaries. And it was obvious we were going to do more printing. So I don't know if you know what a Gestetner duplicating machine is. Yeah. But you take the ribbon out of a typewriter, and you put in a wax stencil, and when you hit the keys, they cut the wax, and then you type this thing, type up these big wax stencils, and then you strap them to this duplicating machine over an inked drum, and then you wind the handle, and it churns paper through, and the ink goes through the cut wax and prints on the paper. I asked Love that you could get electric ones, and by this point in '74, I don't know if people know Venerable Roger Kunsang, Lama Zopa Rinpoche's assistant. He's been his assistant for nearly 40 years now, 35 years. And in his previous life, before he got to Nepal, he was an electrician. So he actually installed electricity at Kopan, and so we were able to buy an electric duplicating machine. We set up our own printing press, and we used to print these texts ourselves. And also the Kopan monks, they would write with sort of metal stylus on these wax stencils, and so they started printing their own patches as well at Kopan, their own Tibetan texts. I was kind of surprised. Lama Yeshe hated to spend money, and it was like 15,000 rupees or something, and so I was surprised he gave us permission. But we really got a lot of value out of that machine and being able to print our own stuff at Kopan. When we got back to Kopan from Bodh Gaya as new monks and nuns and tried to figure out how to live, so we, in the evenings, so in the morning we did Jorcha Puja, before lunch we did Vajrasattva, and in the evenings we did a Mahakala Puja. Lama Yeshe created a sadhana, a Mahakala sadhana, four-arm Mahakala forest. We did that in the evenings. And so that was good. And then a bit later on, we started getting teachings from a couple of the Geshis at Kopan. We got teachings on Abhidharma Kosha and some other texts. In 74, after we got back from Bodh Gaya, Lama Yeshe decided that we should do the first of our, we should do our first 3-month retreat, Vajrasattva Purification Retreat. So he gave us, so he put together a sadhana for Haruka Vajrasattva, highest Yoga Tantra Vajrasattva sadhana that he put together. And he gave us the initiation and he gave us teachings. And then in the summer, a bunch of us went up to Laudo again to do retreat. And there was a group retreat in Kopan Gompa led by Anila Ann. So I was one of the people who went to Laudo, and I spent 3 or 4 months in a cave. And Lama had given a series of teachings, I think about 6 lectures on how to do the retreat. And in this retreat, in these teachings, he mentioned, so sometimes when Lama gave teachings, he would sort of make a joke about one of the students in the audience, or use different people as examples. In this teaching, he mentioned me 3 or 4 times for some reason. So anyway, we went up to Laudo, and then the Lamas went to, on their first trip to the West, they came to the States. And then after the States, they came back to India, and then they went to Australia and New Zealand. So this was their first trip to the West. Meantime, I was in a cave called Charok Cave, which is about 15 minutes away from the Laudo Gompa. And there are a couple of lamas, students of Lama Yeshe's, that he brought up from Sera to teach the young monks. And this was starting to be a growing community of local monks. One of them was Lama Lundup, and who later became the abbot of Kopan, and the other was Lama Pasang, who became more like the manager of the monastery and looked after the physical side of it. So they were at Laudo, and with about 25 or 30 young Sherpa monks. And then there were this house that I first stayed in the previous year that I mentioned. There were about three of the students did a small group retreat there. This is 74. And there were, I don't know if people know Thubten Pende. He did his retreat in a room in the nunnery, Tamo nunnery down the mountain from Laudo. And another monk on Chodak, he did a retreat in a small cave above mine. And Peter Kedge and Harvey Horrocks did a retreat in a small house at a place, tiny little village called Mende, just below Laudo. So we were all over the hill doing the Vajrasattva retreat. And so I was reading, before the retreat started, or as the retreat was starting, I started reading this commentary that Lama had given. And somehow I thought I was getting this subliminal message in his teachings that I was going to die. And that I was going to die during this summer up in Laudo. So at first I was like really annoyed that if he knew I was going to die, why the hell send me up here where there's no, I was the only doctor. There was no medicine or hospitals, so then I ran over to Laudo to the monastery, and I said to Lama Lundup, listen, you can level with me, but before Lama left, did he give you any instructions about doing pujas for me when I died or anything like that? And he looked at me and laughed. He said, oh, you have very good understanding of impermanence. And I was like, no, I don't have understanding of impermanence. Lama Yeshe's giving me this message that I'm going to die. And, you know, I really believed it. And so then I thought, no, well, even in the West, you get sick, you're going to die, even if there's all the hospitals and medicine there. So maybe he realized it was going to be such a bad illness that I'd never recover wherever I was. So anyway, I sort of came to terms with the fact that I wasn't getting out of there alive. And so then honestly, it really helped me. Because, you know, when I was doing my recitation and trying to do the visualization and Vajrasattva and consort above the head, and there's all these details I'm trying to visualize, and purification and the nectar, and, you know, all the negativities coming out and everything, you know, I had terrible concentration. And every time my mind wandered, you know, I'd say to myself, listen, you're going to die up here. You've got to get you don't have time for distraction. So actually it helped, you know.
So there's a question about your retreat.
Yeah.
Question about the retreat is, what kind of shelter did you have? Like, were you just on the mountain, or were you in a sheltered area? And secondly, how long was the retreat, and did someone bring you food? Right.
So I don't know if you can see in Big Love the photo of the Charok Cave in 1974.
Okay.
I was there altogether 4.5 months. And as I mentioned, there was a nunnery down the mountain, Tamogompa. And one of the nuns there, her brother was actually one of the top students at Kopan. And her name was Tsultan Dorma. His name was Tsultan Gyaltsen. Her name was Tsultan Dorma. And so I arranged with her to, there was a tiny little yard around the cave and a gate. And every Saturday there was a market at Namche Bazaar, you know, 2 or 3 hours away, 3 hours for me, probably an hour and a half for the locals. And so every 2 weeks I would leave a note for her at the gate with what I wanted, and she would go and bring it back. And so that's where I got my food. I also brought up a bunch of staples with me from Kathmandu, rice and tsampa, you know, Tibetan barley flour, and potatoes. So she would get vegetables and maybe curd, and some of the stuff that she got would only last 3 or 4 days. But I was taking precepts every morning, so I only ate once a day. And sometimes it was difficult to make a fire. And so it was kind of a luxury cave. It had a partition, and I had a meditation side. And then I had another room with a wooden floor where I had my sleeping mat and I slept, and there was a little stove there. So a lot of these caves aren't sort of caves that the spelunkers love. This was more like, you know, sometime in the past, some pieces of cliff had broken away, and these big boulders come bounding down the mountain, and they lodge in the ground, and they form an overhang. So then they build with rocks. They build up a wall around this to make a room. So Charok Lama, who was a Lama from close by there, had once meditated there a long time ago, I guess, and he'd made this retreat cave and it had a front wall, it had a couple of windows, and like I said, it's a meditation room and the partition. And so I got to say that was probably the best 4 months of my life. You know, no offense to the wife, but I didn't want to come down from there. You know, So after I'd done about, you do 100,000 mantras. So after about 25,000, my visualization was basically zero. I could barely visualize light, let alone really see anything. So I thought, oh, this is ridiculous. I got to start again, So I started again, doing the count. And again, when I got to 25,000, my visualization wasn't any better. So I thought, oh, screw this. I'm going to count those first 25,000 anyway. So then I said, okay, immediately I was at 50,000. And then when I got to 100,000, maybe it was slightly better. Maybe I could see a little bit, but I was just having it was such an amazing experience that I really didn't want to come down. But in the meantime, the Lamas had been to Australia, and Anila Ann, who'd been Lama Zopa Rinpoche's assistant for the Kopan courses up till that point, she went with them to Australia, and then they started a centre called Chenrezig Institute after the course in Queensland in 1974. So that had been put together by Australian students who'd been to Kopan, to the 4th and the 5th course, and in 73. And so the Lamas started this. They were shown some land nearby where the course was. It's about an hour north of Brisbane, and they contacted His Holiness Trijang Rinpoche, and he made some observations and said that was a suitable place. So they decided to make a centre there. And then Lama Yeshe left Anila Ann there to develop the centre. So she was a little disappointed, and Lama said, why, Anila? Why don't you want to stay here? She said, oh, Lama, I always want to live in your pocket. And because she'd always, for 4 years, she'd been around the Lamas constantly, 4 or 5 years. So anyway, he left in Australia. So I had the job of being Rinpoche's assistant at the 7th course at the end of 74. So as much as I wanted to stay in Laudo, I couldn't, because I had this job that I had to come down for. So I came down for that. So that was the 7th course at the end of 74. And then the Lamas were invited to go to, so as I said, in 74, they went to the States, Australia and New Zealand. So,
I'm going to show something.
yeah, so that's from Lama. When the Lamas started going to Australia, going to Melbourne, they stayed at my mother's house. And this is in her backyard under her magnolia tree and her little poodle, Bobik. So she offered Bobik to Lama, although I think she loved Bobik more than me and my brother. But she offered him to Lama, and Lama accepted. He said, oh, thank you, dear, but would you look after him for me? So so my brother took that picture. Bobik lived till he was about 18 or 19. He was blind, and then he stumbled into my brother's swimming pool and drowned, unfortunately. But, he's probably reborn around Lama at some point. Okay, so so they did this trip in 74, and then 75 they were invited to a lot of other places. They were invited to some Dick and Meredith, who I mentioned, had been in Laudo in 73. They were doing some work, something or other in Bangkok. So they invited Lamas to Bangkok to do a weekend seminar, and then Australia, New Zealand, the States, England, Switzerland, Italy. That was basically the trip. So Lama Yeshe asked me if I would accompany them as their sort of teaching assistant and roadie to manage the logistics and help with stuff at the courses. So, you know, I was pretty pleased to be able to do that. So we headed off.
What year are we now?
This is 75 in February. We headed off. First we went to Darjeeling. So the Lamas had met their first student, this Russian-American woman, Zina Reshevsky, who finished bringing them to Nepal in 68. Can't get into that story now, but you have to get big love to get all the details there. But when the Lamas left Darjeeling with Zina to go to Nepal, Rinpoche had left a trunk with some special robes and other stuff there. So Lama said we should go back and collect that stuff. So first we went to Darjeeling and collected Rinpoche's stuff. And then from there we went down to Calcutta, and then we flew to Delhi, and then we went up to Dharamsala. And then there was a bunch of students ordained up there by Lati Rinpoche. And then we set off. We had audience with His Holiness. So one thing Lama Yeshe always did before he went to the West each year, and when he came back, was see His Holiness to get His Holiness's advice, and then come back and report to His Holiness what had happened on the trip and what he'd done. So, you know, a lot of Lama Yeshe's activities in the West were discussed with His Holiness. I don't know what exactly what His Holiness said. When we came back from this trip in 75, was it? Yeah, I think that time. The Lamas went to see His Holiness Trijang Rinpoche, who was the junior tutor of His Holiness the Dalai Lama, and the root guru of Lama Yeshe and Lama Zopa Rinpoche. And so the Lamas talked with Kyabje Trijang Rinpoche. He was sitting on his bed, and they're talking. I was kind of at the back of the room, not understanding anything that was going on. And when we came out after the meeting, Lama Yeshe turned to me very sternly and said, "Did you saw Haruka?" And I was like, I know I was supposed to see Haruka, but I said, "No, Lama, I just saw this old monk." So he manifested extreme disappointment that I hadn't seen Chakrasamvara, of whom Trijang Rinpoche was a manifestation. Anyway, so yeah, so we did this trip.
This is the beach of Queensland, isn't it?
Yeah, this is near Chenrezig Institute. It's about 15 miles inland, about that, inland from the beach. This is Maroochydore, I think. And this is 74 or 75.
75. So we're coming up to 10 past, so keep going.
So, so on this trip, the students, actually Roger Kunsang, had organized a house for the Lamas near Sydney. So we first went there, and Lama Yeshe said that Rinpoche had to do retreat. So Rinpoche stayed in this house to do retreat with Roger looking after him. And that laid the seeds for something else, obviously. And I went to Melbourne with Lama. And this is the occasion. That's my mother's living room. That's my mother and Lama with Bobik again, and some monk on the left, and my sister-in-law, Alison, and my brother, Dorian, and Alison's first child, born in January 75, Kalu, named after Kalu Rinpoche. not sure why exactly now I think about it, because I don't think Alison or Dorian ever met Kalu Rinpoche. But so I went to Melbourne, and Lama gave a whole bunch of talks and a 5-day meditation course. So a lot of the talks Lama gave were in some of our books, Becoming Your Own Therapist and The Peaceful Stillness of the Silent Mind. And the 5-day course he gave near Melbourne is in a little book called Ego, Attachment and Liberation. So they're a really amazing series of teachings that Lama gave. And for a lot of people, it was the first time, most people, that they'd ever seen or heard a Tibetan Lama. Then we came back to Sydney, and Lama Yeshe had told me that I had to give a 10-day meditation course myself. So I was a little surprised that we had these 2 lamas there, but I had to teach this course. And he said I should teach on the text the 37 practices of bodhisattvas. And perhaps the reason Lama chose that was because in Bodh Gaya the previous year, in 74, before His Holiness gave the Kala Chakra initiation, he gave a 3-day commentary on the 37 practices. His Holiness commentary on that is on our website, lamayeshe.com, actually. So I had a transcript of that course to help me along. So we did this 10-day course, and Lama did retreat in the house, and he had Rinpoche. So this course was given in a sort of like a Boy Scout campground sort of place. Lama said Rinpoche should stay there too. So I think Rinpoche was there influencing me while I was trying to talk about this text. When I got to the verses on emptiness, I had Rinpoche come out and explain those. And then towards the end, I think Rinpoche gave precepts the last few days. So this is one of Lama Yeshe's public talks in Sydney. I'm holding a microphone up to him because people were asking, he was answering questions. So I point the microphone out at the audience when they asked a question and hold it up to Lama when he answered, I think. We're taping it. They had electricity in Sydney.
1975.
So anyway, then we went up to Chenrezig, and Anila Ann had built this amazing Gompa, and so that was the first course that the Lamas gave at Chenrezig Institute. And it was a 1-month course following the Kopan style of Lamrim course. So then after Australia, we went to New Zealand, and there was a 2-week meditation course in Wellington in the North Island. And then a group of students, there was a Canadian Lama called Namgyal Rinpoche. He was a Westerner. He had a bunch of students, I guess in Canada, maybe in America, and had a group, I think it was called the Sphere Group, in the South Island near Christchurch in New Zealand. And they invited Lama down to do a weekend seminar. So while Rinpoche was teaching the course in Wellington, I went down with Lama to the South Island for this weekend seminar. And I remember so it went pretty well. And then, but when we had to fly back to Wellington, the weather was really bad, and the flights were cancelled. So we had to stay in this motel. And I remember, I think it was the first time I saw colour television. And in New Zealand, I think it was like only one channel. And well, New Zealand. And So Lama was sitting in his chair watching thing, and I was sitting on the floor next to him, having to explain everything. Walt Disney and cartoons, and then they were playing rugby in knee-deep mud. And so I had to explain to Lama what, I didn't know anything about rugby really, but I had to, you know, I had to explain to Lama why they were running around in mud with this ball. At the end of the Chenrezig course, it finished at Sakadawa, and this photo is my mother. Lama Yeshe had everybody go outside on the mountain, on the hill outside Chenrezig, and do meditation at Sakadawa. So that's Lama Yeshe and Lama Zopa Rinpoche with my mum. Then after we left New Zealand, there was a course had been organized in California at Lake Arrowhead, and which is just outside of LA. And the plan was for the Lamas to go to Hawaii and do a weekend seminar for a group. I think it was called the Arija Foundation, I forget now. Some sort of Western teacher. They had a beautiful place in Hawaii, Honolulu. And so, but the attendance, the people signing up for the Los Angeles course, the sign up was quite slow, and the students were very worried they wouldn't have enough people coming to the course. So they asked Lama if he wouldn't come early and give some public lectures to publicize the course. So Lama, Sister Max was the Lama's African-American nun who was the main supporter of Kopan Monastery for many years. She was a school teacher at the Lincoln School, the American school in Kathmandu, and she contributed her whole salary to supporting Kopan Monastery. She supported the whole place for many years, and the Lamas and the young monks and everybody. She joined us in Australia, and she came to New Zealand with us. And so she and Lama flew to Los Angeles, and Lama gave a couple of public talks. And so just Rinpoche and I went to Hawaii, and then we went on to LA to meet them. Then we went up to Lake Arrowhead. Often during the Lama's teachings, they would call a pee-pee break. So I'm calling a pee-pee break on myself. Okay, Wendy will show some pictures.
No, we're actually nearly finished. You have to go.
Yeah, I really have to go.
Okay, you go. But I think...
As the Terminator said, I'll be back.
Okay. All right, don't worry. Okay, off you go. So I'm just sharing a few photos. This is from an album, I think Lama wearing ceremonial crown, 1976. So on the Lama Yeshe Wisdom Archive website, which is lamayeshe.com, then there are endless photos. And that's Sister Max, Nick just mentioned, Mummy Max, who was one of Lama's very earliest students. By the way, I never met Lama. I've just heard for many, many years now about Lama. I came along 2.5 years too late. But this is Sister Max Matthews, and she gave all her money to Lama to support the monks. So yeah, if you go on the archive website, it's, a treasure trove. So these are some of the little monks for sure that she was the mummy too was supporting, and who was considered, the Lama asked her to be the mummy. Yeah, so that must be Lama Zopa Rinpoche opening the eyes of the statue. Actually, I wonder if that's the Tara statue, the famous Tara statue at Kopan with the Tara pond. Dumcho would know. Maybe that was, there was a Tara statue, I think, outside the original Gompa. And then there was a pond created around the Tara statue. I think that, if I'm correct, I think that was the inspiration for us to also have a Tara in the backyard at Kurukulla Center. There's Lama Yeshe. Also, this is Chenrezig Institute because it's the land that Nick and his ex-girlfriend Marie, who was a nun, and then another couple, they donated the land to Lama. So this must be the one of the courses at one of the earliest courses at Chenrezig Institute, 1975.
77, I think.
So there is one question, not exactly about Lama, but wanting you to surmise what Lama
Sorry
would
about
say.
that. Old man's bladder.
There is a question about what they're asking you to think what Lama would say. It's an LGBTQ question about what Lama would say. I can read it to you.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. All right, so.
Question?
Question, yes, there is a question. So I can read it. So the question is, thank you for this talk. What would Lama Yeshe say to LGBTQ Buddhists who feel drawn to the teachings, but sometimes left out of the social aspect at straight-run Buddhist centers?
Straight run?
In other words, run by straight people, not people who are LGBTQ.
Doesn't include us.
Well, anyway, of course, actually, there are some centers that are definitely run by the LGBTQ communities. In other words, does being an LGBT person create more difficult conditions for achieving enlightenment? And if not, why not? So.
Well, I'm just consulting Big Love here because it does come up. So in Big Love, I don't know if some of you know Tim McNeil. He was the director of Wisdom Publications for 30 years. In Big Love, in the first volume, it says Tim McNeil, an American, returned to Kopan for Yangtze Rinpoche's enthronement. He had attended the fourth course in 73, and in a private interview confided to Lama Yeshe that he was homosexual. He asked me what I did, but I was too shy to answer. Said Tim, I was only 22 at the time, but I knew my sexual orientation. I had a famous homosexual Jesuit uncle in the United States, John McNeil. He was expelled from the Catholic Church and wrote a controversial book, The Church and the Homosexual. It was the first time I had come out to another human being, to Lama Yeshe. Lama was utterly matter-of-fact and accepting. He said, all men have feminine Dakini energy in them, he told me. So that's just that bit. But, as Chen says, Lama was completely open and I think he wouldn't have any problem in anybody being gay or whatever. He accepted everybody as they were. What was that the whole question?
was also, does it, in other words, does being an LGBT person create more difficult to get conditions for achieving enlightenment? If not, why not?
Well, all sentient beings have clear light nature of mind. So all people and all sentient beings have the potential to become enlightened. What it's really a question of is not what your gender is or what your orientation is, or that is how seriously you practice. It's really up to the individual. It doesn't matter who or what you are. It depends on how well you understand the Four Noble Truths and how diligently you practice meditation and the teachings. That's all. I don't know why it would be more difficult for someone who wasn't straight.
Okay, so there's maybe time for one more story and then wrap it up.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I thought I'd get further along, but I have to come back same time next year. Or actually, when am I doing it?
Right.
I'm doing a not quite the same, but a similar talk. There's a talk called a talk for Thubten Yeshe, our center in New Mexico. And I'm doing a talk called Life with the Lamas. So they asked me to talk about, similar things. So if you didn't quite catch some of their stories, you might hear them again there. Anyway, so I went to those different places I mentioned on the 75 World Tour. Then we got back to India and back to Copan for the 8th course. And I was standing on the steps of the Copan Gompa with Lama one day, and he looked way into the distance, and he said to me, I think we need an organization to keep all this together, he said. And so I looked off way into the distance to see what he was looking at, but actually what he was visualizing was what we have now, probably. There's 150, 160 different centers, activities, projects, et cetera, and he said, we need an organization, sort of a management structure to organize all these centers, because on that trip in 75, a bunch of new centers had started. There was Australia and New Zealand, and in England, Manjushri Institute was being suggested, and in Italy, the Lama Tsongkhapa Institute, and other centres were being thought about. So before the whole thing, Tara Institute in Melbourne. So before the whole thing got out of hand, he said we need something to make an organisation to make sure that all centres have the same. We're all on the same page in terms of what we teach and the direction in which we want to go. So, and then he gave the name, and so there are about 8 or 9 of us at Copan that he said should get together every evening and discuss how to create an organization. So at first, first thing we said, we've got to come up with a name. So we came up with the name, the Yeshe Foundation. And he wouldn't have a bar of that. He wasn't naming anything after himself. So he said, I think we should call it the Council for the Preservation of the Mahayana Tradition. He said, because what are you people? Meaning the people who are meeting together. So a council is a kind of group of people who meet together to discuss stuff. and get things done. So he said, you know, council, and what we're doing is we're preserving the Mahayana tradition of Lama Tsongkhapa. So, you know, we're making sure it survives and flourishes, actually. So actually the name sort of became the mission statement. Later on, as I can't remember exactly when, but we told Lama the council isn't really the right name for a collection of centers or an organization that's composed of centers, as council is a group of people. So we called it the Foundation for the Preservation of Mahayana Tradition. So that's how the FPMT was conceived and how it got going. And then we had our first actual meeting in 1978 in England. The other thing that happened around that time was at the end of 75, after the trip, after the course, this guy, Jesse Sartain, came to see Lama from Dharamsala. He was an American student of Geshe Dage at the Tibetan Library, and he had a small publishing company in Hawaii. And in fact, his wife or ex-wife, Nancy, had, with Alan Wallace, had met Rinpoche and me in Hawaii and shown us around a little bit. He came to Lama and said he had this publishing company and he wanted to publish the teachings that Lama Yeshe and Lama Zopa Rinpoche had given in their 1974 tour of America the previous year. So Lama Yeshe called me over because I was sort of running the publishing at Copan and said, this guy wants to publish our teachings. See if you can figure something out with him, but don't give anything away. So we keep the copyright, and Lama said, we're going to call our publishing company Publications for Wisdom Culture. So, publications, and at that time, Lama was calling the centers, you know, Chenrezig Institute for Wisdom Culture, Manjushri Institute for Wisdom Culture, Vajrapani Institute for Wisdom Culture, sort of wisdom culture being the antidote to samsaric culture. Later on, that everybody thought that was a bit cumbersome, so Publications for Wisdom Cultures. So it became Wisdom Culture, and then later became Wisdom Publications. So Jesse, we co-published this book called Wisdom Energy that Jesse had printed in Hawaii, and that was the first wisdom book, and that's how we started Wisdom Publications. So I think, yeah, time's up. I'm sorry, does anyone have any questions you want to verbalize? You don't have to.
I have a question, Nick. How and why did you come to the States? Like to settle in the States?
Because of the politics, really.
Nick.
Well, no. So it's to do with, there I am, rushing off to the States. Wisdom Publications got going in Nepal with the publication of Wisdom Energy. And then our second book, I mentioned Brian Beresford, whose notes I edited into the first commentary on the Wish Fulfilling Golden Sun. Brian was a translator in Dharamsala, and he translated a couple of teachings on thought transformation by Geshe Ngaon Dage and Geshe Rabden. And we published those as our second book. We printed that in Delhi, actually, advice from a spiritual friend. And then we decided, or Lama decided, we should establish Wisdom Publications in Delhi because it was just much easier to typeset and print things at a better quality in India. And so we started doing that. And at that point, Venerable Rabina had come to Copan and got ordained at the end of 77, beginning of 78. So and I was in the throes of trying to start a center in Delhi. In '77, Lama Yeshe had sent me to Delhi to start a center. It's a longish story I didn't tell you yet. So she'd gone to Delhi to research printers and typesetters and so on, and then went off to retreat, and then I went off to teach some courses in the West, and the Lama Yeshe and Lama Zopa Rinpoche went off on their 1978 world tour. And then we had this meeting, first CPMT meeting in England at the new centre called Manjushri Institute in Cumbria. And at that point, Lama Yeshe said, no, it'd be better that wisdom publications were in England rather than India. So Rabina came to Manjushri Institute, and John Landau came as the editor from America, and there were some Western nuns staying at Manjushri Institute, studying there, and they became some editors. So Wisdom actually got going there in '78 and published the first book from there, which was actually under the imprint Wisdom Culture, Silent Mind, Holy Mind, which was a bunch of Lama Yeshe's Christmas lectures. In Kopan, Lama Yeshe, often at Christmas time, Lama Yeshe would give a talk for the Westerners on Christmas Day. And so then Wisdom developed there in Cumbria for a few years, and then I was in Delhi, and as I mentioned, then I became the editorial director of Wisdom, even though I was in Delhi. And then in '83, the director of Wisdom in London quit, and then I became the director of Wisdom, and then we developed further in London for 6 years. But we found it very difficult to get our books into the main market, which was in the States. So we decided to move to Boston in '89, and we'd actually set up a distribution office in Newburyport in '87 and incorporated Wisdom in the States around that time. So we were kind of set up, and we had a board of directors, and Tim McNeil was on the board. So we just, Rinpoche agreed that Tim could take over running the company, and I would be the editorial director. So we moved in May of '89. We actually officially moved Wisdom from London to Boston. So that's how. That's a very short version.
So there's one question from Facebook, and then maybe, that could be the last question, unless there's any other burning one. But the question from Facebook is from, let's see, Tesh Delay. I have a question from your long experience on traveling and learning with Lama gurus. What did you learn about your life and Nirvana? Want me to repeat the question?
No.
No, got it.
Well, about what I learned about my life, I certainly learned that I had completely the wrong worldview until I met the teachings on Tibetan Buddhism, and as I said, I really. The first course that I did, the third course at Kopan in '72, had a very powerful effect on me, changed my life completely. And I thank Rinpoche for doing that. Because, I was, a card-carrying atheist, as was my mother before me, and scientific materialist. It was like, you get one life, everything is just a result of chemical and electrical activity and evolution, and sometime a few years ago we crawled up out of the primordial slime and gradually developed to become the people that we are, and that the very idea of God was ridiculous, And you know, basically what you see is what you get, and there was nothing hidden or mysterious or spiritual behind it. So I learned that was completely wrong. And so I think, you know, and the main lesson really is that happiness comes from your own mind and suffering comes from your own mind, and external circumstances are merely secondary. So, you know, you learn that, you know, there are two levels of reality: conventional reality and ultimate reality. And conventional reality is the level upon which we work, and that's where karma operates. And that's where, you know, positive karma brings happiness, negative karma brings suffering, and whether your actions of body, speech, and mind become positive or negative depend on your mind. So that was kind of the main thing I learned. And yeah, like that. That's very briefly what I learned. In terms of Nirvana, the third noble truth, I fully believe it's possible to achieve the cessation of suffering. I don't think I've come even close to it yet, but somebody once asked Lama Yeshe, or said to Lama Yeshe, I imagine that Nirvana is must be something like the LSD experience. And Lama said, yeah, well, I guess then we don't have much Nirvana in Tibet. Okay, any last wishes before we wrap this incoherent rave up?
I would just like to recommend Big Love. I've never read any book about Buddhism like that. It's so amazing how Lama worked with his students. It's just a fascinating volume. I've read the first volume and I'm going to reread it. And then I'm looking forward to the second volume. So it's well worth the investment.
Thank you, Deborah.
I'd like to say something, Nick.
Hey, Jimmy.
How are you? For people who are listening to this, I was fortunate enough to take 3 meditation courses with Lama Yeshe and Lama Thubten in the early 70s, and have just read Big Love, both volumes. And it's an incredible read because even at that age, you could never, ever know all these things. Like I say, I was in the 70s, a lot of time, a lot of courses there, India and Nepal, living there, but all the things, the minute details that this book has brought together, you can see how long it took to make this, was just extraordinary. I learned so much stuff that I didn't know about on top of everything, which, you know, if you're a student of Lama Yeshe's or Lama Zopa, the FPMT, it's a must read, especially for people like ourselves who spent the time there. I mean, I learned so much from it. I mean, it was really, you can't thank you enough for, bringing that to everybody's, attention. Unbelievable.
Yeah, well, as you know, a lot of people put a lot of time into it. So it was a major group effort. And I just very fortunate that I was able to be involved, frankly.
Unbelievable.
Yeah, thanks, Jimmy.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, this is wonderful. I think I was just baby, Nick was already monk.
And now I'm entering my second childhood, and you're the monk.
Anyway, it's wonderful. There are a lot of stories, and also I'm very grateful for the 2 books. I just look at the pictures. I didn't.
Yeah, there's a lot of pictures. Even if you can't read, there's 1,550 plus pictures.
The pictures were wonderful.
What they did and the previous Buddhas, this is the teaching for the, and how you say, later and coming students. Therefore, it's very wonderful. It's like, this is like very hard work, This Tibetan we call also waters go, the birds stay there. Therefore,
Water goes, the bridges stay there.
read this right.
Yeah.
Therefore, Maisha is not here, but still the teachings are already here.
Right.
Lama Sabarambachi caring. No, I have a lot of things to talk for the Lama Sabarambachi, FPMT, how they great, Maybe I could just, maybe 5 minutes I can finish. Like example, as Buddhism is Buddha's teaching or survive or not is depends on monks. The monks that the person really hold the teaching. Like when I was joined the Sera in 1990s, it's very poor. Food, where we sit, Then, Lama Sabarambache start to food often, I think first once a month. Then second, then maybe once a week, something like that.
I think first breakfast.
No breakfast. First, just I think the only like Sagadawa one time, devotion one time, like holidays once. Then once a month, then once a week. The monks like, I think maybe if Rinpoche doesn't start food, maybe like more than half monks not stay Sarah because they're not enough food.
Right.
Therefore, right now, like all them, it's not only Sarah who got the enjoyment there, Rinpoche just for everywhere. Therefore, it's very great for how to hold the monks in monasteries. Wonderful. This is like, directly, indirectly for all the students, FPMT, for everywhere, their connection that is really, 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 I'm really that place. I have experienced very great, wonderful. I just should like to say that. Then thank you, the book. I'm sure the younger generation or the new generation, or they can read the book, they say, wow. They just say, wow. Therefore, this is who did the Ribush here. He's our senior student, almost senior one for our FPMT. I think in FPMT, he's one of the senior ones. We are lucky here, Boston, he's here.
I'm so senior, I got my shot already.
This time you're the senior, you get a good good luck. You get
one time Lama Zopa Rinpoche said to me, without Nick, no FPMT. No, one time Lama Zopa Rinpoche said that to me. He said,
we listened to
just like that.
Start, Lama Yeshe upon him. Therefore, I like to say thank you for you. How to follow your teachers and how you do until like he's over 70s, but still he's walking like same as like 20 years old.
No, Geshe-la. I remember how I was 45 years ago, and I can't work like that anymore.
No, even I can say 25 years ago, right? I cannot do any more like these things. I can jump that thing. Anyway, thank you for, from bottom of my heart for.
Thank you, Geshe-la.
Lama Sabarambachi, also you holding all the experience, just mouth to mouth. Now put the book is very wonderful for everyone. Happy New Year.
I will say that the support of Sarah goes back into the 70s. Lama Yeshe was before your time, Geshe-la, but the monks used to have to go out from Sarah to the Tibetan houses with little coupons, and they would try and raise a rupee or 5 rupees. And the monks had to go out and beg from the Tibetan community in Nepal and India and in Switzerland and, where there were expat Tibetan communities. The monks had to go from the monasteries and to try and establish or re-establish the monasteries in southern India. And, Lama Yeshe raised actually quite a bit of money from Sarah, even back in the 70s, to just start building some of the kamsans and so on. And then, as Geshe-la said, Lama Zopa Rinpoche started the Sarah Food Fund in the early 90s, and started off with little food, and then eventually it built up to 3 meals a day, 3 really substantial meals a day. And then it built up to like $5 million. And so that money, then the whole thing was handed over to Sarah, and now they're managing the endowment themselves, and they're feeding the monastery, I think, from the interest. That's what I understand.
When I was there, there also we have field. The monks have to go to put the cones, we put the cones on the drop, then we, cover the feet, walking feet. Then we have to go to also keep the, pigs. The nighttime, the pigs come to them, they take out.
Oh yeah, the wild pigs. There were
Yeah, wild
elephants.
pigs, yeah. This is my time, before the more wars, there are elephants. At that time, I was one time there. Me and my classmates go to the church where the pigs, but we didn't go. We just sleep someplace.
Well,
Who's the manager that time? He come nighttime. He just coming, right? We are not there. Then some areas, they all pigs they took.
Oh no!
We have to go. That is 3 days for the kitchen duty.
Because you fell asleep and didn't guard the fields, and the pigs.
Yeah, pigs eat all them.
What are you going to say?
What was I going to say? There's a wonderful little film on YouTube, I think, called the Buxa Lamas.
Yeah.
So the lamas who were in the refugee camp at Buxa Dwa that I mentioned, where where Rinpoche met Lama Yeshe, and those are the lamas who went to South India, like Yeshe, our beloved Geshe Tsulga, Geshe-la's uncle. And they had to go down and they had to clear the land, and they had to build the buildings, and they had to do all this manual labor, which is unbelievable. And so there's a thing called Buxa Lamas where they explain all about this in the early days, how they got those monasteries and Tibetan settlements going, as Geshe-la explained just now.
Yeah,
Anyway, I think
the food is very bad, condition is very bad. A lot of monks die. A lot of monks get TB.
Yep, a lot of monks died from TB.
Then he told us decide to move for them to South India. Okay, now I'm stop to talking. Otherwise, we're not finished. Happy New Year, everyone. Hey, Wendy. Wendy Khan.
Yeah.
Look, other Wendy.
Yeah, other Wendy. Small Wendy's there.
Yeah.
So
he's here.
So guys, we started with bodhicitta motivation, and I hope we've created some merit in the action of talking about Lama Yeshe, Lama Zopa Rinpoche, their amazing activities. So let's just dedicate that merit. Because of this merit, now quickly reach enlightenment for the sole purpose of enlightening all sentient beings. Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Geshe-la.
We'll do it again.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Good night.
Thank you. Good night.
Happy New Year.